The night was cruel. A storm swept across the open plains, thunder rolling like the growl of some angry beast. Lightning cracked the sky, lighting up the desolate trail that wound through the wilderness toward Dry Creek. The earth, dry and cracked for months, was suddenly drowned in rivers of rain that churned into mud. Through this chaos rode Ethan Cole. Hat pulled low, duster heavy with water, his horse snorted and fought against the wind. Ethan had ridden in storms before, but there was something uneasy in the air tonight, something that made his instincts prickle like spurs against skin. Then he saw it. A wagon stood abandoned on the roadside, tilted awkwardly where a wheel had collapsed. A single lantern flickered weakly against the rain, casting shadows across the sodden earth. Beside it, in a white wedding dress that clung pitifully to her soaked frame, stood a woman. Her veil was plastered to her face, her lips trembling, her eyes wide and filled with terror. She looked like a ghost stranded between worlds. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. "Ma'am?" His voice was steady, carrying even through the storm. "You lost out here?" The woman lifted her head slowly, rain dripping from her lashes. For a moment she looked as though she didn't believe he was real. Then her voice broke, frail and shattered. "He left me," she whispered. "My husband. He left me here." Ethan's gut twisted. He knew her. Everyone in Dry Creek did. Clara Dawson, the new bride of Thomas Granger, his land-hungry neighbor. The wedding had taken place that very morning. Now, hours later, she was abandoned in the storm like unwanted cargo. Ethan swung off his horse and wrapped his coat around her shivering shoulders. "You'll freeze if you stay out here, come on." Her body was stiff at first, but when she nearly stumbled in the mud, she clutched at him, as if afraid he'd vanish too. Together, they mounted his horse, Clara sitting in front of him, her soaked dress heavy as stone. Ethan urged the horse forward, cutting through the storm until the warm glow of his cabin flickered in the distance. By the time they reached his cabin, Clara was shaking so violently Ethan feared she'd collapse. He dismounted and lifted her down, half carrying her inside. The fire roared to life as he threw logs into the hearth, the glow spilling across rough-hewn walls. "Sit," Ethan commanded softly, guiding her toward a chair. He handed her a blanket and poured water into the kettle. Clara clutched the blanket as though it were her only lifeline. Her eyes stared into the flames, unseeing, her lips moving silently before she finally spoke. "Why?" The word trembled into the air. "Why would he do this to me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't know if she wanted comfort or truth. Instead, he handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "Drink, you'll feel better." She obeyed numbly, the heat chasing some color back into her pale cheeks, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Ethan sat across from her, his eyes narrowing. He had never trusted Thomas Granger. The man had ambition like a wildfire, always spreading, always consuming. But abandoning a bride on the very day of his wedding? That wasn't cold feet, that was something darker. Later, after Clara had fallen into exhausted sleep on his cot, Ethan sat by the fire, oiling his rifle. The storm had eased, but unease gnawed at him. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. Ethan moved to the window, peering into the night. Through the misty rain, he saw a lone rider on the ridge watching the cabin. The figure lingered only a moment before turning and vanishing into the trees. Ethan's jaw tightened. Whoever that was, they weren't out there by accident. Something told him Clara's abandonment wasn't a tragedy, it was bait. At dawn, Ethan saddled his horse. "I'm heading into Dry Creek," he told Clara. "See what folks are saying. You stay here, bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Clara looked uneasy. "You think they'll come back?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "I know they will." Dry Creek was alive with gossip when he arrived. The saloon buzzed with whispers, every eye turning as he stepped through the swinging doors. Sam, the barkeep, leaned over the counter. "Heard you've been playing hero, Cole. Taking in a bride who don't belong to you." Ethan ignored the jab. "What's the word on Thomas Granger?" Sam lowered his voice. "Word is he lit out fast after the ceremony. Headed south, maybe. Folks say he's knee-deep in debt. To men you don't want to cross." Ethan's stomach tightened. If Thomas owed outlaws, abandoning Clara wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. He'd sold her out, one way or another. And now, Ethan realized, Thomas's enemies would come for her. Ethan returned home faster than he left, but not fast enough. The cabin door was ajar. Inside, Clara sat rigid by the fire, fear carved into her face. Two men loomed over her, the same rough types Ethan had glimpsed in the saloon. Well, one sneered. The cowboy comes home. Ethan's rifle was in his hands before the words finished leaving the man's mouth. Step away from her. The taller outlaw smirked. Easy now. We ain't here for trouble, just business. The girl belongs to Thomas, and Thomas belongs to us. Clara gasped, pressing against the wall. Ethan's voice dropped to steel. She doesn't belong to anyone. Wrong answer, the outlaw spat. The room exploded into violence. Gunfire cracked. Ethan dropped one man with a shot to the shoulder, then grappled with a second, fists colliding in a storm of rage. The fight smashed across the cabin, knocking over the table, scattering embers from the hearth. Finally, Ethan slammed the outlaw against the wall, rifle pressed to his chest. You tell Thomas, he snarled. If he sends men to my door again, I'll bury them myself. The outlaws, bloodied and beaten, stumbled into the dawn. Clara collapsed into the chair, tears streaking her face. Ethan, what's happening? He met her eyes, his own dark and steady. Because, Clara, your husband sold you to the wrong kind of men. Over the following days, Clara barely spoke. She cleaned the cabin, helped with chores, and tried to pretend life was ordinary. But Ethan saw the truth in her eyes. Fear, shame, and something else he couldn't yet name. One evening, as the sky bled red with sunset, Clara finally broke the silence. You think Thomas ever loved me? Ethan's hands stilled on the reins of his horse. I think Thomas loves land and money. Beyond that, I wouldn't wager a cent. Her throat worked as she swallowed back tears. I thought marriage would be a new life. Instead, it's a prison I can't escape. Ethan wanted to tell her she was safe now, but he wasn't sure that was true. That night, as the prairie slept, Ethan stood guard outside the cabin. The moon bathed the land in silver, and the silence was sharp enough to cut. He thought of Clara, asleep inside, haunted by betrayal. He thought of Thomas, running from debts, leaving destruction in his wake. And then he saw it again. Figures. 3 riders on the horizon watching. The war for Clara Dawson had only just begun, and Ethan Cole knew he was already in the middle of it. The next morning dawned red, the kind of blood-stained sunrise that made old ranch hands whisper of bad omens. Ethan stood outside the cabin, rifle cradled in his arms, watching the horizon. The 3 riders had vanished into the night, but he knew they hadn't gone far. Inside, Clara moved quietly, preparing coffee. She had changed from her ruined wedding dress into one of Ethan's old shirts, tied at the waist with a strip of cloth. She looked less like an abandoned bride now and more like a survivor. Still, the fear lingered in her eyes. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind made her flinch. Ethan sipped his coffee, gaze fixed on the distant ridge. They'll be back. Clara froze. Then what do we do? We stand, Ethan said simply, and we fight. Word spread quickly through Dry Creek. People whispered about Ethan Cole harboring Thomas Granger's runaway bride. Some claimed he'd stolen her. Others said Thomas had sold her to pay debts, and Ethan was the only one fool enough to interfere. At the saloon, a gambler named Pike told the tale with relish. Heard Granger owed a fortune to the Rattlesnake Gang. Nasty bunch, those boys. They collect what's theirs, be it money or people. A hush fell over the table. Everyone in Dry Creek knew the Rattlesnakes. Killers without mercy. Outlaws who'd gutted men for less than a silver dollar. If Clara was their prize, Ethan Cole had put himself in their crosshairs. It came at dusk. Ethan was chopping wood when the first shot rang out, splintering the log beside him. He dove for cover as bullets tore through the yard. Clara screamed from inside the cabin. Stay down. Ethan roared, rolling behind the water trough and returning fire. 3 riders circled the cabin, guns blazing. The air filled with smoke and the acrid tang of gunpowder. One outlaw fell from his saddle with Ethan's shot, but the others pressed hard. Clara crawled to the window, clutching Ethan's spare rifle with trembling hands. I can help, she cried. You ever fired a gun? Ethan shouted. She hesitated. No. Then you learn now. Her first shot went wide, but the second clipped an outlaw's arm, sending him howling into the dust. The last rider fired wildly, then turned tail, retreating into the gathering dark. Silence returned, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. She lowered the rifle, staring at her shaking hands. I hit him, Ethan looked at her, pride and worry mingling. You did good, but this was just the beginning. Later that night, Clara sat by the fire, staring at the rifle leaning against the wall. There's something you should know, she said softly. Ethan glanced at her. Go on. I wasn't just Thomas's bride, she whispered. I was his bargaining chip. He promised my dowry, my father's ranch, as collateral for his debts. When my father died, I inherited everything. Thomas saw me as nothing more than land and cattle wrapped in a dress. Ethan's jaw clenched. So marrying you wasn't love, it was business. Tears welled in her eyes. And when he realized the rattlesnakes wanted more than money, he left me to them. The truth settled like ash between them. Clara Dawson wasn't just abandoned, she was hunted. 2 days later, as Ethan and Clara repaired the damage to the cabin, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. Thomas Granger. Clara froze, hammer slipping from her fingers. Ethan's hand went to his gun. Thomas dismounted slowly, hands raised. I ain't here to fight. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You've got a funny way of showing peace, leaving your wife for wolves. Thomas's face twisted with desperation. You don't understand. They'd have killed me if I didn't give her up. I had no choice. No choice? Clara's voice shook with fury. You swore before God to protect me, and you sold me instead. Thomas's gaze flickered. I came back to warn you. The rattlesnakes ain't stopping. They want her alive. And they'll burn Dry Creek to the ground to get her. Ethan raised his revolver. Then you better pray I don't kill you before they do. The attack came sooner than expected. That night the rattlesnakes descended like vultures. Torches lit the darkness. Shouts rang across the plains. The cabin was surrounded. Out she comes, their leader bellowed. Hand over the girl and maybe we'll let you live. Ethan answered with gunfire. The battle erupted, flames licking the walls as torches struck the roof. Clara fired from the window, her face set with grim determination. Thomas, coward that he was, tried to flee through the back, but a bullet found him before he reached his horse. He fell in the dirt, screaming. The cabin shook with violence. Wood splintered, glass shattered, smoke filled the air. Ethan fought like a man possessed, his rifle cracking, his fists striking. Clara reloaded with trembling hands, refusing to surrender. At last the rattlesnakes withdrew, dragging their wounded with them. The cabin smoldered, half destroyed but still standing. Clara collapsed into Ethan's arms, sobbing. Will it ever end? Ethan held her close, his voice low and fierce. Not until every last one of them is in the ground. In the days that followed, Ethan and Clara rebuilt what they could. They worked side by side, sweat and determination binding them closer. At night, when the prairie was quiet, they spoke in hushed tones. Clara told stories of her childhood, of the ranch she once called home. Ethan shared scars from his past, the battles he'd fought alone. A bond grew between them, born not of convenience but of survival, trust, and something deeper neither dared name. One evening, Clara looked at Ethan across the fire. Why are you risking your life for me? He met her gaze steadily. Because no one deserves to be abandoned. Not like that. Not ever. Their eyes lingered, the unspoken truth humming between them. Ethan rode into town one last time, meeting Sheriff Doolin at the edge of Dry Creek. The rattlesnakes are gathering, the sheriff warned. More men than this town's ever seen. If they come, we can't stop them. Then I will, Ethan said. The sheriff studied him, then nodded. You're a fool, Cole, but maybe you're the fool we need. That night, Ethan returned to the cabin where Clara waited by the fire. He laid his rifle on the table and took her hands. Clara, listen to me. Whatever comes, I'll stand between you and them, even if it kills me. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. And if it does, then I'll stand beside you. The storm outside had passed, but a greater storm was coming. Ethan knew the final reckoning was near. And this time there would be no running. Dry Creek braced for war. Word came that the rattlesnakes were riding in force, dozens strong, armed to the teeth. Farmers abandoned their homesteads. Merchants shuttered shops, mothers clutched children and prayed. Ethan stood at the center of it all, rifle slung over his shoulder, face grim as stone. Clara stood beside him, no longer just an abandoned bride, but a woman hardened by fire. They'll come at dawn, Ethan told the sheriff. We need barricades, sharpshooters, traps. And if that fails, Sheriff Doolin asked, then we make our last stand. At sunrise, the rattlesnakes came. A black tide of riders thundered across the plains, dust rising in choking clouds. Their leader, a scar-faced brute named Cutter, raised his pistol high. "Bring me the girl," he roared, "or we paint this town red." The battle that followed was chaos. Gunfire shattered windows, horses screamed, men fell. Ethan fought from the barricades, his rifle never missing its mark. Clara reloaded and passed ammunition with steady hands, fear swallowed by determination. The townsfolk, inspired by Ethan's ferocity, fought harder than they ever thought possible. But still, the rattlesnakes pressed on. In the midst of battle, a wounded figure crawled through the dust, Thomas Granger. Somehow he had survived his wound, dragging himself to plead with Cutter. "She's mine," Thomas screamed. "You promised me land if I gave her up. Don't let him keep her." Cutter laughed coldly. "You're a bigger fool than I thought." He raised his pistol and shot Thomas where he knelt. The betrayer's body collapsed in the dirt, forgotten before it hit the ground. Clara watched, tears streaming, not of love lost but of disgust ended. The battle raged until at last Ethan faced Cutter in the street. Dust swirled, guns smoked, bodies lay scattered. "You should have stayed out of this, cowboy," Cutter snarled. "Then you should have stayed out of her life," Ethan shot back. They drew. The world slowed. 2 shots rang out. Cutter staggered, blood blossoming across his chest. Ethan stood firm, smoke curling from his revolver. The rattlesnakes, leaderless, broke and fled. Dry Creek was saved. Silence fell over the town. Survivors stumbled from hiding, tending to the wounded, burying the dead. Clara found Ethan in the street, his arm bleeding but his spirit unbroken. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." Ethan held her tight, breathing her in like the first breath of spring after a long winter. But deep inside, he knew battles always left scars. Weeks later, Dry Creek began to heal. The saloon opened again. Children laughed in the streets, and the memory of the rattlesnakes faded into legend. Ethan repaired his cabin with Clara at his side. Together, they planted crops, raised stock, and built something that looked suspiciously like hope. One evening, as the sun set golden across the plains, Clara touched his hand. "You saved me, Ethan. Not just from them, from myself, from believing I was nothing more than property." Ethan met her eyes, his own filled with something he could no longer hide. "And you saved me from being a man alone in the dark." They kissed, the kind of kiss that sealed promises without words. Years later, folks would still tell the story of the cowboy who stood against a gang to protect a woman not his own, of the abandoned bride who became stronger than anyone imagined, of the love born from betrayal, forged in blood and sealed in fire.